Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of season 1 right here on a book. I want to first off thank each and every one of you for having followed along for this first season. Oh, we've had such a wonderful time interviewing authors from all around the world, dozens and dozens upon dozens of authors with beautiful stories to tell. Some of them have inspired you, some of them have made you laugh. Many of them have taught you so much. But I want to say that today's final interview for season 1 is going to be an interview like none other. I truly believe that this author's story is going to be one of the most inspiring, impactful, and empowering stories you have heard to date. Wally Long is the author of a fantastic book called Why Me, Lord? And while his personal story and journey that led him to write this book is one of deep sorrow and deep tragedy, from that, he has produced a story of hope and inspiration that I know you are going to fall in love with. So won't you please join me for this final episode? And by the way, we will be back this fall with more beautiful author interviews, but please stay with us today so that you can hear from Wally Long, who is the author of Why Me, Lord? Let's go. Hello, welcome to a book. I am thrilled that you are here. This is the final episode of season 1, and we are going to hear from Wally Long finally. And Wally is going to tell us all about his personal story, his journey, his writing process. You're going to hear some fantastic stuff today, I promise you. But before we get to Wally, please make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button, because as you know, when you subscribe to this channel, it helps our authors. Well, the moment you have all been waiting for, we are going to hear from Wally Long. Wally, welcome to today's show. I am so excited for you to be here. You have no idea.
I'm very honored that you asked. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you have no idea. I don't get the opportunity to read all of my authors' books that I have on. I just don't have enough time. But this was a little personal for me because your niece and my daughter are actually friends. And I said, I have to get Wally's book because I knew a little bit about what might be in this book. So I wanted to get it. I finished reading it today
Mhm.
and was absolutely blown away. And I want to tell you, the last page is my favorite.
Oh,
That is
really?
my
Yeah.
favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I want our audience to know something about you. So if you don't mind, would you just take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little about who you are?
Sure, sure. I'm Wally Long. I've been married to Sylvia Long for almost 44 years, coming up in July 18th. We have, yeah, it's coming close. We have 6 children of our own, and then of course we adopted two, my brother's 2 children. So we now have 8 children. We have 9 grandchildren. I served in the United States Marine Corps for 10 years from 1980 to 1990. And then when I parted from the Marine Corps, I went to work at the federal prison in Springfield, Missouri, worked there for 20 years and retired shortly after the incident that started this book. I needed to retire, but the timing worked out well. So now after 2 or 3 years of getting our family back together and kind of getting back on our feet after all this happened with my brother there in Colorado, I was called to pastor a church in Mount Vernon, Missouri. It was just one of those things. I hadn't planned on that. I had always been interested in vocational ministry and been ministering in one way or another for many, many years during all of my other activities and careers I had. But this church called me and said, "Hey, we heard that you are a pretty decent preacher. We're needing someone for a couple of Sundays filling in. Would you mind doing that?" And I said, "Sure." And I did. I filled in for 3 Sundays. Apparently, they liked what they heard. They called me up a couple of weeks later and said, would you mind coming back and talking to us about staying on as our pastor? And I did. And I've been there since 2014 now. So
That's
nine and a half
incredible.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's incredible. I want to tell you, as you were sharing some of the details of yourself with me, I learned some things that I didn't know, and that is that we have so much in common.
really.
July 19th, my husband and I will be celebrating 40 years
Wow.
of marriage.
Congratulations. Yeah.
We have 9 grandchildren as well, although I don't have as many children as you do, but we have 9 grandchildren. So you and I have quite a bit in common, including I used to work in a prison.
There you go.
I
Wow.
was a mental health counselor, and I also
Okay.
taught. I was a teacher as well in the prison. And my husband was a corrections officer. The fancy
Wow.
word, I think, is what you said in your book.
Yes,
The
correction
correction
officer. That's
officer
right.
is a fancy word for prison guard. I
That's
love
right.
that. I thought it was wonderful. But so we have quite a bit in common. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that about you until we started.
Yeah.
Wally, I want you to share with our audience the inspiration for you writing this book. And I don't think you'll be able to do that if you don't tell us the backstory.
Yes. It started in October of 2006 with my youngest sister. I actually received a call from my brother at the time. He was obviously still living. He called me and it informed me that my youngest sister, our youngest sister, Tessie, who was 40 years old at the time, committed suicide. It just kind of blew me away. I mean, I thought everything was good. I talked with her just a few days before this happened, but she found herself in some situations that she couldn't get out of, and she felt like the only answer was to take her own life, and so she did. That kind of turned our world upside down, but we made it through that. And I actually preached the memorial service for my sister there in Nebraska, which was very difficult to do. But we made it through. Began just continuing on with the church we were ministering in at the time, just a small church, family church that we'd helped to start. Then in the summer of 2007, my 18-year-old son, who at the time he was 18, he's obviously not anymore, but he was 18 years old. He had a motorcycle accident just a couple miles from our home on his way to our house to have lunch with us and lost his right leg below the knee, went through a barbed wire fence, and it just tore him up terribly. He literally almost died. I think he actually did uh, die at one point. His heart stopped beating, and they were able to bring him back. But he went through several surgeries in a hospital for 2 weeks. It, of course, then started a intensive home therapy to gain the use of a
Wow.
prosthetic leg and all of that. But the day we brought him home from the hospital, I received another phone call, and my mother went to the hospital in Colorado on her deathbed, and she died a few weeks later in September of 2007. So all of this happened within 11 months. It really kind of shook us. I was very emotionally drained. I was not able to continue ministering where we were at the time. So we left and went to another church just to kind of recoup, rebuild, get our lives back together from all the trauma. And then just a few years later, on March 1st, 2011, I received another phone call, and all of these bad tragedies came from phone calls. And honestly, for a few years, I got to where I did not want to answer the phone anymore.
Oh, I
I was,
can imagine. Yes.
especially at a time when I wasn't expecting a phone call. I kept thinking, when is the other shoe going to drop?
Yeah.
But my nephew, my oldest nephew, my brother's oldest child, called and through tears in his eyes told me that someone had broken into his home, to his parents' home, and killed his parents, and that the two little ones were on their way to the hospital in Colorado, being life flighted to Denver. And what did not know at the time if they were expected to live. He didn't know at the time. Uh, Later, we found out well, obviously they did survive, but the boy was near death for quite a while before he pulled through. So that was the backstory of all of it. Of course, when this happened, I just went into survival mode, kind of emergency mode, and just began to do what needed to be done to take care of the family, to take care of his kids, to take care of our family, and just oversee the situation the best I could. Of course, there wasn't much I could oversee because it was just moving along at a rapid pace. But after we got home from the hospital, the kids did survive. We adopted them. We brought them to our home. Actually, from the time we were in Colorado at the hospital, they were ours essentially, because as soon as they came out of the hospital, they went home with us. The adoption process began. The state of Colorado paid for it all. They put them in our home, and so it still was kind of survival mode for a while, because we had these two kids that were
Yeah.
obviously very traumatized,
Yes.
just lost their parents. They needed a lot of intensive counseling. Some of my own family needed counseling. My youngest
Yes.
son was just it really messed him up badly. So we all went into counseling for a while. My wife and I eventually found ourselves in counseling, because when the survival mode kind of lessened and we were getting back to an even kill, there was just this letdown for us, and we needed some counseling. So we went into counseling for a while as well.
Understandable.
And during that time, I found myself asking the question of the book. I said, why is all of this happening to me? Why have all these bad things happened? I don't understand it. I've been trying to do what's right. I asked these questions in my heart. I asked them of other people. I didn't know what was going on. So I began searching the scriptures. I began searching the Bible. I knew, God, if there's an answer there, you've got to give it to me. I need something from you. And in my search of the scriptures, just reading various passages and trying to find answers, trying to find comfort, God gave me a sermon. And I honestly believe it's probably the most powerful sermon I've ever preached. I began to share it. I got opportunities to share it shortly after that in different venues, at homeschool conferences, at other churches. And that sermon, it touched a lot of people. And I began to God began to speak to my
Mm,
heart very slowly. But
my
it's like,
goodness.
Wally, these people need to. There are other people that need to hear this message. You need to put it in a book.
Yes.
And so I finally relented and did. I started writing in 2002 or 2022 in January, and had the
Wow.
book done shortly after, about 9 months after.
Such a story. So many people have tragedies in their life, but very few people have back-to-back tragedies like you did.
Mm.
And of course, you would ask the question, why me, Lord?
Why? Yeah.
Yeah, and as trite as it may sound, I think that the only comparison would be Job.
Hmm.
And how many times did he, I don't understand why this is happening to me,
Right.
Lord,
Right.
So, but you began to search for answers. You looked for biblical truths for those
Yes,
answers, and you found them.
I did.
And you wrote a book about it. And
I did.
I want you to talk about the book. What made you decide that you needed to put this into a book, first off?
Well, I just believe that the message of the book is something people need to hear. It's a message that people in this world, especially this crazy world we live in right now, with every time you turn on the news, there are people dying, getting kidnapped. I mean, it's just one thing, bad thing after another. There's a lot of people in the world that I believe have the same question I did, and I think they hear a message of hope, a message of encouragement, and a message that helps them to find some of the answers that they may be asking or searching for. And so that's why I wanted to put it into a book, so that that message could be read and heard by more people.
That makes sense. When you sat down to write the book, how emotional was that for you?
It was not as emotional as you would think, honestly, because by that time, well, I started it actually, I guess, in January 2023. I said 2022 earlier, it's 2023. By that time, I had already shared that story with so many people. Now, I still share the story on a regular basis and talk about the message of that book to different groups, and it still brings tears to my eyes when I share it. But I've shared it so many times that it I think the healing comes with the sharing, and I
Yes.
began to heal a little bit more. And so when I sit down to write the book, it was still tender, but not super emotional. I just began to pour my heart out on paper, what I'd been telling people for years.
Wow. That's incredible. I had written a book. Now my story is nothing like yours, but I had written a book about a mission trip that I took and other stuff, some mission trips that I had taken. And as I wrote the book, I found myself, it was difficult for me because there were so many not painful parts, but emotional parts of the book that I was writing. And it was hard. It was like I was reliving those emotions all over again. And there were even new feelings that came up for me as I wrote. I think there is something about the process of writing that is different than just the sharing or just the
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
That it almost finalizes things, it cements things, right? When we
Yeah.
see
I
them in
think so.
black
I
and
think you're
white.
right. Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but for me anyway, I can't speak for other people, but I know for me that it sort of finalizes things.
Right.
Well, what was the process of writing this out? It sounds like, do you write your sermons
I don't.
out?
I just do. I preach off an outline. So I
Okay.
write a very basic, bare bones outline with the scriptures that I tend to read or quote. Just a basic outline. Then I know what stories I want to say at different points in the outline or what words I want to speak. And then I just get up there and kind of let it go, let it
Yeah,
fly.
yeah.
But
Wonderful.
and
So
sometimes it turns out like I planned, and sometimes it doesn't.
it never does, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's how I publicly speak too. I don't do well with notes or if I write out the whole thing because then I'm too busy looking at them and I get lost. So anyway, when you were writing, what was that process like? Did you just sit down and write out the whole thing or had you outlined the book before you wrote it?
I had the outline from the sermon, so that was
Okay.
the basis of the book. But then knowing I was going to write, I began to organize it a little bit more. As I began to search and search for additional scriptures for the points of the book, more ideas and thoughts came to me. So as I wrote, I probably added 6 chapters or sections as I was writing that thoughts that came to me as I was searching for other scriptures and just making sure I was correct in different things. New ideas came to me
Uh,
as I wrote, so it expanded a little bit as I wrote. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. And how long did it take to write it?
I had the manuscript done. I started in January 2023. I had the manuscript done by September, and was ready to submit to the publisher.
Wow. And did you send it through an editing process?
No, I went through Westbow Press, who had their own in-house editing people. Now, I
Okay.
did have several people read it. My wife is accomplished. She has a degree in communication and writing.
Mhm.
She writes for a career. Uh, I sent it to some other people I knew that were good at writing and with grammar and all of that. So it went through several hands of basic editing. And I made a few changes here and there, but not professionally. No,
Okay.
they did that in house through Westbow Press.
Well, I have to tell you that I was very impressed with the with how the book was put together. I I thought it was done very well. It was great.
Thank you.
And so that okay, you get that done, they publish the book, and then you get a copy of the book. What was that moment like for you?
That was the feeling of holding my own book and seeing my name on the title of a book was it was almost beyond description. It was
Yes.
just a feeling of accomplishment like
Mhm.
it I've just not really had in my life. Now, I've been on big stages, I've competed in public speaking, I've won a number of awards, and it's always thrilling to have that and to have that trophy and to experience that time. But hold that book in my hand was far better than holding on to a trophy that I'd won because I knew I finally did it. It's almost I guess the only feeling that's comparable is when I was younger. I used to do a lot of hiking and a lot of mountain climbing, and climbing a very difficult peak and getting to the top and knowing that no one did that except you. You did it. You made it to the
Right.
top of that mountain.
Right.
That's kind of the same feeling, I guess, in a sense,
Oh,
was knowing that I went all the way, I made the distance, I made it to the top, and I did what I planned to do. It was
yeah.
just
I
an incredible feeling.
don't think there is any other feeling quite like that when you hold your book. And
Right.
I've written several books. I'm currently about ready to publish my eighth book and working on my ninth.
Wow.
And so each one of those books is a special feeling. But I will say, we just talked about this yesterday when we did an interview, that my first book, it was so surreal. I couldn't believe it. I kept staring at it.
Yeah.
My first book was terrible. It was garbage. I don't ever recommend anybody read that one, but I did it and it taught me that,
Right.
oh, I can write and I can write more and I can get better. And which I did. I went on to get better
Right.
with each publication, but there's nothing like it. I've heard it being compared to giving birth and
Oh,
holding your child for the
yeah.
first time. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's exactly like that, mostly because my children are probably watching. But
Yes.
I will say there's this feeling that these were my thoughts, these were my words, and they came out on paper. And now I have this ongoing legacy. Even in my fictional writings, I have this
Right.
ongoing legacy for my grandchildren who may someday want to know something about me that they didn't ask when I was alive, and they can find out more about their grandmother through her writings.
Right.
So it was such a surreal feeling, I think. Just
It is
so
incredible.
incredible. Yeah,
It
yeah.
is.
And I don't know, there's just nothing like it. So when you write, tell me this, when you write, whether it's the outline for your sermons or this wonderful book that you have written, do you listen to music while you're writing? Does it have to be quiet? Everybody has a different process that they go through.
I don't listen to music. I'm kind of once I get focused on something, if I had music on, I wouldn't even hear it. I get very focused on what I'm doing, to the point where my wife will have to interrupt me a couple times to get my attention, because I'm so focused on what I'm doing. I tend to just zero in on the thoughts that are coming to me, and putting them down in an outline, or looking at the scripture and finding the different points from the scriptures to put into an outline, or in the writing process, just the thoughts. I just type and I write and I type and I write, and it just kind of keeps coming out until I take a breath. Then I stop and kind of look back what I wrote and decide where to go next. So
Yeah, so very
yeah.
focused on what
Yes.
the task is in front of you. Are you
Yeah.
like that with other areas of your life or just
I,
writing
I
in
tend
particular?
I tend to be in some ways, yes. When I build, I built a number of things. When I build, I try to get very focused on that. I'm very single-minded, I guess, when I get on something that I
Yeah,
like a tiger by the tail, I just hold
yeah.
on.
I do that when I'm editing when I'm editing videos and well and sometimes when I'm writing, but I will get so focused on video creation and editing that whole process that I hear my husband speaking but I don't hear a thing he said.
Kind of like Charlie Brown. Wah,
Oh,
wah,
it's
wah,
just
wah.
yeah, I hear but I don't hear. So I totally get that. I understand that process. It's something. Wally, I really want you to tell us what the book is about. I want you to share the message of the book with our audience without spoiling the book, without,
Right.
giving it all away. But before we do that, we are going to take a break and we're going to hear from our sponsor.
Okay.
So we will be back in just a moment. Hey everyone, are you stuck trying to figure out how to finish writing or publishing your book? Well, let me tell you about Victory Vision Publishing. Victory Vision Publishing is there to help you cross that finish line. They have package plans that are tailor made just for your individual needs. They have learning opportunities where you can discover ways of overcoming some obstacles that you might have. Adam Fleming is a wonderful CEO, and they are a fully staffed team just waiting to help you edit, layout, maybe make a cover for your book. Go ahead and join their email list and check out some of the wonderful books and wonderful authors that they have already helped get published. Yep, Victory Vision is definitely the way to go if you feel stuck and just want some support in getting your book out to the world. You're only one book away from changing the world. victoryvision.org. Okay, we are back. We've been speaking with Wally Long. He has been sharing with us about his writing process, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about his book, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I
So go ahead.
when I began when the sermon when God gave me the sermon, it just
I'm going to
naturally.
interrupt you for just a
Sure.
second, Wally. Can you move your camera a little? We're cutting you off at the chin there. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit better.
There we go.
Much better. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very good. When I when when I developed the sermon, God gave me the sermon, it naturally fell into three parts. I think first, to help people understand where we were going, there were just some general thoughts about suffering and trials and afflictions that we needed to deal with. And so the first part of the sermon, the first part of the book, I deal with just general thoughts about suffering and trials and afflictions. And I use a number of words to describe those hard times. But you know what I'm saying when I say this, the same idea, the trials that we go through. So I answer just some general questions like I deal with the fact that suffering wasn't God's intention for this world. It wasn't what he created the world to be, but sin brought suffering into the world, and now it's a normal part of our life. It's just part of what we do in this life as we go through tragedy and trial, and we suffer from it. I also talk about the fact that our trials, there are different severities of trials, and they affect different people different ways. And so we don't want, I guess, basically the idea there is don't get into the trap of saying, well, what he went through is far worse than what I went through, because what you go through to you is bad. Whatever a person is going through, it's hard what they're going through. And when you start comparing that, you start thinking, well, what I'm going through is nothing compared to that. Well, no, it is something. It's what you're going through, and it's difficult. And so I talk about the fact that trials themselves aren't equal, our responses to them aren't equal. And then I answer the question that plagued me for a long time at the end of chapter one, that first part one, chapter one. I answer this question that plagued me for a long time. And it was this idea that was taught in some of the churches as I grew up, that you don't ask God why. And it bothered me because as I was asking God why, I felt like maybe there was something wrong with my faith. Maybe there's something wrong with me because I didn't trust God enough, and I was asking him why. But then as in my search of the scriptures, I found a number of Psalms, because one of the things I did was read through all the Psalms just for comfort and for peace. And I started seeing in those Psalms where David or another psalmist were asking God why. They asked God, why have you turned your face away from me? Why are you letting my enemies get the best of me? And one of them, David actually writes, why are you sleeping? Why
Why
are
are
you
you
asleep?
sleeping? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought, it's not wrong to ask God why. There's nothing wrong with it. David did. God never condemns David. In fact, David, at the end of every one of those Psalms, he always comes back to his faith in God. So
Yes.
he just poured out his human feelings to the Lord, but then realized at the same time that he still trusted God no matter what the answer to his questions were. He was just so I realized we need to pour out those feelings. We have them, we have the questions. So verbalize them to God, let him know, hey, God, this is bothering me. I don't understand this, and I
And
need to
I
know
think,
why.
not to interrupt what you
Oh,
are saying, but I think what's so important to know is God knows our thoughts anyway. He
mhm.
knows that we have the
Yep,
question.
exactly.
There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to
Yep.
ask him when he already knows the question is there. Yeah.
Yep. Something else I deal with in chapter one or in part one is that I believe everything we go through, we can go through. I believe that God gives it, that whatever trials come into our life, whatever gets through God's hands and comes on us, and whatever suffering we go, whatever trial we go through, we can get through it. I believe God is very clear that He will help us, walk with us through it. He'll help us through it. He'll give us what we need to get through the difficult times of life. And I think that's important for people, because when we're in the middle of them, we don't feel that way. When we're in the middle of them, we feel like we're being crushed, like it's over, like life is over, like life has changed. And
So
we need to
true.
understand that we can get through the difficulties that come our way. So that's part one, chapter one, just those various thoughts. Then part two, I answer the question, why me, from the point of what causes our suffering.
I, Wally, I think you are frozen on your end. We seem to have lost you, so I'm going to see if maybe your feed will come back. We lost Wally for just a moment. We were having
Yes.
some technical difficulties, probably due to the weather. I think you are experiencing some high winds, and so are we where I am. And knocks out internet, those things happen, but we're back and we do want to hear what you were talking about. I believe you started telling us about the second half of your book,
Yes,
the
the
second section
second
of
part
your
of the
book.
book.
Yeah.
Part two, we deal with the causes of our suffering. What is it that causes us to go through hard times? And of course, sometimes, and there's actually 5 chapters that are part of that part two. Uh, the first one being sometimes our suffering is caused just by what we do, by our own sinfulness, our foolish decisions, the choices we make. Sometimes we bring our own suffering on ourselves, and then sometimes it happens because other people are sin. You know, when our my brother was killed, it was somebody's sin who caused our suffering. Sometimes we suffer just because bad things happen. We live in a fallen world.
Yes.
We live in a world that there is just it's just a fallen world. Bad things happen. Sometimes it rains when the power goes out.
Yeah.
Everybody's power goes out. You know,
Right.
when
It's
a
not
tornado
personal.
hits, when a tornado hits, everybody gets hurt by the tornado. It's not a respecter of persons, as it were.
Right.
So there's a number of causes for our suffering. So I think it's important for us to understand that it's not always what did I do wrong, and that's what we tend to ask. What did I do wrong that's caused all this? That's not the case. It's very there are times where we cause our own suffering because of our sinfulness, because of our stupidity or foolish decisions. And when that happens, of course, we need to make that right. We need to do what we can to get back on track in life,
Mm.
and make wise decisions. But a lot of times the suffering is just caused by all these other aspects of life. And there's nothing we can do about it. It's there, it hits us, and now we figure out where to go from there.
Mm.
That's part two. Part three, and I think where it really is the meat of the issue, we talk about the purpose of our suffering, or what God uses our suffering for. I use the analogy or the phrase you've probably heard that no politician lets a good tragedy go to waste. You know,
Yeah.
they always try to politicize some tragedy, whether it's a school shooting or whether it's a homeless crisis. That they try to politicize it to get political points out of it. And we say that about our politicians, kind of tongue in cheek, you know, because it's just the way politics happens. But I believe it's actually true of God. I think God does not let our suffering go to waste. I believe
Yes.
God uses the tragedy in our life, regardless of the cause, regardless of what caused our tragedies or our sufferings. God uses those and turns them into something good. And so we deal with in chapter 3 some of those reasons or the purposes that God brings about because of our suffering, some of the things he does to cause our suffering to turn into something worthy, something good, something that brings benefit to us rather than just harm.
That's
So that's what
beautiful.
we deal with in chapter 3.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know in my own personal life that what it took for me to turn to God was some personal suffering.
Yes,
It's what caused me to say, okay, Lord, the way that I have been living isn't working, and I want to do things your way. Now,
right.
even in my walk with Christ, I have gone through things that have caused me to suffer. And I think that one of the misconceptions that people have is that, well, I'm doing everything that God wants me to do, so therefore I should not have to have suffering. But Jesus himself said, in this life, you will have trouble. We
You will
will.
have suffering.
And on this side, and just like you said in your book, it is a result of, we live in a fallen world, and it is a result of sin that entered into the world that has caused
Ultimately,
all of, yes, it's caused all of this. And so it will happen, and it's not personal, you
that's right.
know,
Right.
and God will always use it.
Well, I like what you said there, right? When you talked about some suffering that turns you to actually follow the Lord,
Mm.
because that's the last chapter of the book. And to me, the most powerful purpose of our suffering is God uses our suffering, I believe, to draw us back to himself, to
Yes.
draw our attention back to him. Because sometimes we go through life, we get distracted by the pleasures of life, or by the difficulties of life, or just by the busyness of life. We get distracted. We get our eyes off of him. Kind of like Peter when he was walking on the water, he was doing fine until he got his eyes off the Lord and looked at the storm, and then he started to drown.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we do the same thing. We get our eyes off of the finish line, which Jesus is the finish line. We get our eyes off of that, and sometimes our suffering, God uses it to draw us back to look at Him. And I think that's an important part to remember, because it that will fit anybody, regardless of whether you're a believer or not. Right now, I believe
Well,
even
I want
those.
to ask something. With all of the
Sure,
tragedy that you experienced, were you ever angry at God?
at times, not not violently angry, but I was angry, kind of like you might get angry with your spouse and just get kind of silent angry. Just you're just a little perturbed, and you just don't want to say anything. You don't want to speak to them. That happens in marriages, and I think I was kind of that way with God. It's like, God, I don't understand this. This really bothers me, and if I feel like you don't love me sometimes. We feel that way.
Well, I'm asking because I know so many people, including myself, have been angry at God, and sometimes they feel as if maybe God's punishing them because they're angry,
Right.
and then they're
Right.
angry because they think God is punishing them. So it almost becomes this vicious cycle. But it is something that sometimes will stop people from turning to God. I'm
Right.
angry at God. I don't want anything to do with him. He allowed all of these terrible things to come into my life. And that's, a little bit of I don't want to say misconception, but it's a skewed view of what's really
It
happening
is.
in
It
this
is.
world. And so I want to just touch on that for a moment because I think that there are people out there who are angry at God because of the
Mhm.
things the tragedies they've had, the suffering they've gone through. Maybe it was an illness or a financial crisis that they didn't think they deserved, and they become disillusioned and angry. What would you say to that person that might be going through that?
I would say, just like our children sometimes, and I've had my children get angry at me, and because I disciplined them, because I would not let them have something they asked for, because life wasn't what they wanted it to be, because dad was being mean. And they get angry, but when it's all said and done, they realize, as they grow up, they realize dad was protecting them. Dad was trying to help them. Dad was helping them make wise decisions by letting them make a foolish decision. So I think it's the same for me. It's the same way with God. Yeah, we get angry with him sometimes. We wonder why, and we don't want to have it. We don't want to have anything to do with him because of what he's allowed in our lives. We have to understand that, again, that's why I talk about the causes of our suffering. Sometimes it's not God allowing things to happen to us. Sometimes things just happen because they happen, because bad things happen. Sometimes we cause it, evil people cause it, but then God uses it to say, look, I'm still here with you. I can get you through this if you will turn to me. I can make this into something beautiful. I can make this into something victorious if you will turn your attention back to me
I
and let
really
me guide you through this.
Yes, I really love that. I want to share something
Sure.
personal, actually,
Okay.
that I walked through in my life. I'm not sure if I'm going to paraphrase something you said in the book, but basically, God never allows our suffering to go to waste. He will
Right.
use our suffering for His glory and for good. And I so totally believe that. And I also believe that so many of the things that we go through in this life have nothing to do with us. And it's all about being able to help other people. So early on in my life, I suffered two miscarriages back to back in between my first two children. And when I became pregnant with my now second daughter, I was walking in the door, having just come from the doctor's office and finding out that I was pregnant yet again. In less than a year, I went through three pregnancies.
Wow.
And so I was angry and I didn't understand. And I said, as I'm walking in, I had my first daughter. She was still young. She's on my hip. I had groceries in one hand. I can tell you the entire moment. And I just found out that I'm pregnant again and I'm scared. and I'm upset. And I said, I don't understand this, Lord. Why would you let me lose two babies just to get pregnant again? And as I said that, I'm walking through the door. This was long before cell phones. My phone was ringing. And I went to the phone and I answered it, and it was my neighbor. And she said, can you come over here and pray with me? I'm miscarrying. And in
Mm.
that moment, I knew that the whole reason I went through that it wasn't about me. It wasn't because God hated me. It was so that I would be able to be there for other people who were also going through a
Right.
similar crisis in their lives. So, oh,
Exactly.
I think we may have you're frozen, but we can hear you. We lost your we lost your video. Oh,
Oh boy.
there you are.
Well,
You're coming back. You're coming back. Technology, folks, is a wonderful thing, but sometimes there are aspects of it that are out of our control. So, Wally, you're still there, but your picture keeps freezing up. We
I
want to
think the
continue hearing.
I think the weather's moving in here, and maybe it's
Yeah.
causing disruption in the cell signal.
Well, one thing I would like to do before we end this podcast, our final episode for the season, I want to share your book with everybody.
Okay.
And we're going to go ahead and pull that up. We're going to do a screen share and we're going to pull that up. The book, Why Me, Lord, is on Amazon. And oh, it is a phenomenal book. And you were able to just distill all of these things down to I was able to read this book in just a couple of hours and I was done. Very digestible and so impactful, so powerful. This is a big question that people have. Why me? You know? And yet you were able to take this question and give us answers, give the world answers that I think we all need in a very quick and comprehensive way. So this is Wally's book. This is Why Me, Lord. You can find this on Amazon. So you said that you went through a publishing house to get this book done. Did they make the cover of the book for you?
They did. They designed the cover. I gave them my idea, and then they found the photos and designed the cover for me. They did a wonderful job, I believe.
Yes, and it just really depicts the whole, the storms that we go through, and
Right.
really just tells us what the book is going to be about. And so I'm just excited about this whole book. I just love this whole thing. You can get this book in paperback, Kindle, and you said hardcover as well, correct?
Hardcover as well. Yes.
Okay. And yeah, so make sure that you're going over to Amazon. I will leave the link of this book in the description of this podcast so everybody can go find that for themselves. But as we start to wrap up this interview, Wally, well, let's start with two things. I ask all my readers this. What advice do you have for somebody who is thinking that they would like to write a book? What would you tell them?
I would say set aside a little bit of time every day on a regular basis and just try to write. And I made the mistake early on of writing and then going back and fixing my writing before writing more. And I think that was a mistake. I think better, but your best bet is just to write and keep writing and keep writing. And then when you've gone either all the way through it or most of the way, then go back and kind of reread and then change things as new ideas come. So I would say just write, just sit
Okay.
down and pour your thoughts, put your thoughts on paper or on paper figuratively, put
Yeah.
them in the computer, type them in there, write them, get them written down, and then after you've finished all your thoughts, then go back and kind of review and correct and polish and fix. Uh, and I think the other thing is be confident. That's one of the things that kept me away from writing for a few years, probably longer than I should have, was even though I'm a pretty decent public speaker, I kept wondering, well, but nobody's going to read what I put on paper. Nobody's going to read my book. I mean, I'm not that good,
Yeah.
and so I just be confident that if you're doing God's will, there will be a good come from it. And so just write, just put your thoughts on paper as God has given them to you, and don't quit writing. Just keep on writing until you're done. It's just like climbing that mountain or like riding that bike for 100 miles. The last few miles seems to get harder and harder and harder, but you just keep writing, keep pushing through, getting it on paper, and yeah, I think that's the big thing. Don't stop. Just keep going until you're done.
Yeah. And I think that seems to be the number one answer that I get whenever I ask writers that question is, what would you tell somebody that wants to write? Just do it. Just do it.
That's right.
In this day and age, there is nothing stopping anybody from being able to write a
Right.
book. Anybody can do that.
Right.
And so, lastly, what I would like to hear from you, but I guess it's a twofold question.
Okay.
At the end of suffering, is it possible for somebody to feel joy again?
Yes. There at the end of suffering, because of the purposes that we describe in the book for suffering, there is peace, there's comfort, there's joy, there's encouragement at the end of it when you get through it because of what God does with it, whether it's making you stronger, whether it's making you thirsty or hungry to see heaven, to see glory. But there is joy that comes from our suffering because otherwise there wouldn't be any purpose to it. God
Yeah.
takes it and turns it into something beautiful. Like you said with the baby analogy, the birthing of a baby. I've watched 6 of my children be born. It's not
Mhm.
easy. I've never done it, but I've watched it and I know it's not very easy. But I also know at the end of it, the joy in my wife's heart and in her face when she's holding her baby is just beyond description.
Yes.
And so I think just there is joy at the end of suffering. There is good that's coming from it. God is doing something in your life through your suffering, through your
That's beautiful.
trial, and just be aware that it is happening and that good will happen. Good will come and God will do something great with it.
Absolutely. Ah, I love that. What a beautiful thing. Do you have any parting words that you would like to share with our audience today before we end this podcast?
Just that if you're going through hard times, know this that you're not alone. In the multitude and numerous millions and billions of people that have lived on this earth, what you're going through is not unique to you. In that other people have done it as well. Other people have gone through similar things. Now, everybody's unique situation might be a little different than the person next to you, but know that you're not alone. Other people have gone through similar things, and know that you can get through it. Know that you can survive and thrive and find joy. Share with people. Let other people walk through it with you. I found myself sharing my story with complete strangers. And that was actually a healing process for me, is sharing that
Mm.
story with strangers. And then they would share something of their story with me. And then I would get to pray with them. And just helping them get through their trials was helping me get through my trials. But I wouldn't have found out their trials had I not shared mine. And so I think let other people walk through it with you. Don't try to get through it alone. Realize that you're not alone, that you came through.
Wow. Powerful stuff. Yeah. It is so easy for us to think that other people don't want to know about our pain, and it's easy to shut other people out. And I think that's just because we had somebody else on earlier this month that talked about a suicide that happened in her life. And anyway, one of the things that we discussed was really it's our own discomfort that makes us not know how to handle grief, not know how to handle it when somebody else is in pain. But, and so we think, well, if I have a hard time dealing with somebody else being in pain, then surely nobody wants to deal with me being in pain.
Right.
So we try not to share that. But so much beauty I have found can come from, just like you said, sharing our personal journeys and sharing those difficult times with somebody else, especially when we are on the other side and we
Right.
have the joy and they can see that hope and they can say, all right, if they can get through this, I can get through this too. Yeah, so we give hope and
Correct.
encouragement to others. But well, Wally, I am so honored to have had you
I
on this
thank
program
you.
today. I truly am. I want to show everybody Wally's book. This is Why Me, Lord? And you can get this on Amazon. It's an easy read. I promise you will not be disappointed in this book. And I don't remember if I shared this on screen or off, but what I wanted to tell you was my favorite part of the book was the last page, and I'm not going to tell anybody what's on that last page,
Okay.
but it was my favorite part of the entire book. So, well, you have been a delight. I
Thank
am
you.
so
It's
grateful.
been an honor. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you were our last guest for season one, and I want to let our audience know that we will be back this fall with season two. In the meantime, you have been watching a book. You've heard from Wally Long. He's the author of Why Me, Lord? And please go get that book. You will not be disappointed. One of the few books that I've actually had time to read, and it was well worth it. And I can't recommend it enough. So go get Wally's book. And meanwhile, thank you for spending your time with us. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.
God bless.